Hello, everybody. Good afternoon from my part of the world, which is the Netherlands at the moment. Good morning to people that are in another time zone, and good evening to other people that are in even another time zone. Welcome, everybody, to this session. It's the second session of today's Global Demography Forum, and we have another great topic to discuss. Today's session will be on attitudes, aspirations, and crisis resilience. And as in this entire session of the Berlin Demography Days, we will focus on the younger population, the youth generation. I'm Nico van Nimwegen. I'm a sociologist and demographer based in the Netherlands, and also associated proudly with the International Union for the Scientific Study of Population, and I'll be your moderator today. We have a great set of speakers. Our keynote speaker will be Shireen Jejeebhoy from India. Then we will have discussants, two. Lorence Kabasele from the Democratic Republic of Congo will be the first discussant, and Katarina Vuckovic will be the second discussions. And then we will have two panelists that will add to the discussion as well, Dominique Kirchdorfer and Raminta Bagdonaite. The conduct of the session is very simple. We will start with the Shireen's keynote, and then we will follow with the discussions. Let me briefly introduce Shireen to you. Shireen is a director of the Aksha Center for Equity and Wellbeing in India, and she's also the president of the International Union for the Scientific Study of Population, the World Association of Population Scientists. Shireen is a demographer and a social scientist, and her work focuses mainly on younger people's health and development. So we're very happy that she accepted to be the keynote speaker for this session. And Shireen, the floor is all yours.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Nico. I believe I have sent my presentation. My network is a bit unstable, and so I'd prefer that you play the presentation, and then I'll be here to answer the questions. Is that okay? Thank you. And thank you all for having me.
Thanks for being with us.
Hello, everyone. And thank you to Population Europe for asking me to speak here today on an issue that may seem very alien to many of you, but is a grim reality in India. So why child marriage? Well, globally, almost 1 in 5 girls are married below the age of 18, which is what we consider child marriage. And for many, marriage is forced. That is, it's non-consensual. The girl has no right to make meaningful consent. Our SDGs have called for the elimination of child, early, and forced marriage. It's of global concern. And the drivers are largely economic, cultural, and crisis-induced. So what I'm going to do today is to try and synthesize with the available quantitative and qualitative data a profile of what we know about child and non-consensual marriage in India. So let's go to the situation. Here you see child marriage trends over the last 30 years. As you see, the black line is the total. And what you see is a very gradual decline until about 15 years ago, followed by a steeper decline and a more gradual decline again. So that today, 23% of girls are marrying below the age of 18, and 7% of girls aged 15 to 19 today are marrying below the age of 15, very early. Who marries early? Well, no surprise, it's the most disadvantaged. Those who have less education, those who live in rural areas, those who come from poorer family backgrounds. And now turning to forced marriage or marriage without consent. There are many types of marriage in India. The most traditional is parent-arranged marriage, as you see here, where the girl has absolutely no say and meets her husband for the first time at the wedding. And here, there's been a gradual decline over this period, over the birth cohorts from the 50s to the 90s, but just a 10% decline. The second kind of marriage is the semi-arranged marriage. And in this, the girl's opinion is sought to some extent, and she may or may not have met her husband before marriage. This proportion has gone up from just over half, 54%, up to 59% more recently. So very slowly. And it varies. They asked me one day before the engagement. I said yes. So hardly an informed consent. The second quote, of course, suggests much more informed consent. And finally is the self-arranged marriage, the kind you know best, with a romantic partner and so on. Child marriage is not so alien to Europe. I looked at some data and here's what I found. In several countries, we're seeing rates around between 10 and 20% even. And even instances of forced marriage are observed. So coming now to the drivers, what are the drivers? Overarching drivers to me at macro level are 3 Ps: poverty, patriarchy, and the pandemic or any humanitarian crisis situation. These 3 Ps really condition the ways that households perceive child marriage and act upon it. So let's look at the first P, poverty. How does poverty play out at household level? Several ways. Girls are seen as expensive and restricted by cultural norms from contributing to the household economy. So child marriage becomes an attractive option through which to transfer the economic burden of daughters to the husband's family. So as you see here, any further delay could force them into more debt. So my parents told me I had to get married. They wanted to reduce the burden. Norms, as I said, limit girls' ability to contribute to the household economy. It's considered loss of face for parents to take money from girls. So the mother says here, girl goes to another's home, so she should use that money there. In this house, we live off our sons, not our daughters. Dowries then are prohibitive, and the wedding expenses have to be huge. So weddings need to be lavish to preserve the family name. And so to save these kinds of costs, many times all daughters in a household can be married off together, as you see in the third quote. I married all 3 daughters together. There's no money at home. But the system interacts with poverty also. In poor areas, the distant location of secondary schools, poor quality, learning outcomes are poor. So these are often a reason for dropout. And acceptable pre-marriage opportunities are also not available. So marriage becomes the only option that is seen for the girl. The second P is patriarchy. How does patriarchy play out? Child marriage is a social norm that many are afraid to violate, and child brides are seen as much more malleable, so it triggers child marriage. Everyone does it. If anyone violates it, then they are despised by the community. Then there's a widely held norm that girls have no value. A girl is held to belong to her husband's family, and so she is what we call pariah dhan, a most horrible term. Raising a girl is like watering someone else's garden. The third, and probably the most important, is the control on girls' sexuality. marriage is seen to protect the sexuality of the unmarried, and virginity is closely linked to family honor. Even the hint of a girl-boy relationship can destroy this family honor. And elopement or self-arranged marriages are considered just unacceptable. As you see from this quote, I would be so afraid we would have to hold our heads in shame. If a girl runs away with a boy, she won't be allowed back at home. So what do? A girl is not allowed to go out of the home. She's closely guarded so that her virginity is preserved. And finally, there's the fear of girls' safety in public places in terms of harassment, unwanted touch, and so on. And so girls are restricted from that, and so unable to access opportunities, again, making marriage the only acceptable option. Third is the pandemic or other humanitarian crises. And basically, poverty and patriarchy combine to accelerate premature marriage in COVID times. Whether you look at it as a consequence of unemployment and loss of income, or of school closure, discontinuation, and so on, or just being at home. These are precipitating child marriage. And the global estimates are huge, 10 to 13 million in a decade, 1 million in South Asia, and in India also there are indications of increase. So does anything work? What makes the situation more resilient? What works? Fortunately, we do know what works. A recent global systematic review from less developed countries has pointed to some interventions which are very similar to some scoping work that was done in India just before. So what works, what is the most important is keeping girls in school, the single most consistently observed best practice. So the global review suggests that it's conditional cash or in-kind transfers that are most important in delaying child marriage. A second is the support for school to work transitions, support for market-oriented training, employment opportunities that are acceptable to girls, and there are several precedents for this. The third is gender transformative life skills and rights training at school and community level, which builds girls' agency and ability to exercise voice in the home. And finally, a fourth, which has less support, but in the Indian context appears essential, and that is the mobilization of parents, families, and communities. So in conclusion, child and non-consensual marriage are intractable problems in India. They compromise girls' well-being and violate their ability to exercise their rights. We know what works. What is missing is the commitment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Shireen, for your presentation and raising some very important issues, which are also very familiar, especially if you look at what works and what does not work. Also very familiar for other parts of the world. Thank you for that. So we'll now turn to our first discussant, who will be Lorence Kabasele. And she is the president of the African Youth and Adolescents Network, AfriYAN, and she is from the Democratic Republic of Congo. AfriYAN is a key platform for advocacy in sexual and reproductive rights and population and development. And she provides also a youth lens, as it said in her curriculum, to lots of UNFPA's politics and policies and programs, among many other activities. Lorence, the floor is yours. That would be great if Lorence
Nico,
would
it
be
seems
there.
that she has connection problems. She's not there.
I thought I had seen her. Okay, then without further ado, we will change the order of the discussants. Sorry for that, people. So we'll go to our second discussant, which is Katarina Vuckovic. Welcome, Katarina, and she is from Bosnia and Herzegovina, where she is head of the Department for Youth Work in the Institute for Youth Development, KULT, in Sarajevo. And Katarina has a very long experience in youth work and in the youth field, with a strong focus on youth rights. Katarina, thank you for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for having me, actually, and inviting us to this very important event and giving a chance to speak from the perspective of youth work. I think it's very important, especially what the introduction presentation showed. Maybe in Bosnia and Herzegovina, we are not maybe dealing this much with minor marriages and what presentation showed, but for sure what I heard is disadvantaged children and young people are more sensitive to being exposed to the problems that were presented in the presentation. When it comes to conclusion, I totally agree, and most of the research here in Bosnia and Herzegovina also shows that keeping young people in education is extremely important. What I would add is not only a formal education. It's extremely important to recognize youth work as a tool for supporting young people activism in the society, and also them just being in the society and being recognized as a resource rather than a problem. And this is something that in Bosnia and Herzegovina we hear very often, I would say even on a daily basis, that young people are the issue or the problem, or the problems of young people and so on. So in this sense, in order to work on aspirations and attitudes of young people and support their transitions from children to adulthood, not only for girls, I think it's extremely important that non-formal education also takes the place. And there is a place for non-formal education, especially for young people who are disadvantaged in any way. Girls seem to be even more important in this manner, because the opportunities that they are given are rather less than for young men. But without working on both genders, without working on equalities, and without working with every stakeholder in the society, the situation will not change too much fastly. We see this in the Institute because we try to work with all stakeholders around young people, involving municipalities to actually approach to young people issues on a systematical manner, working with teachers and other actors that are influencing young people's everyday life makes actual change. Education, for sure, it is important, but we shouldn't only focus on formal education, and we shouldn't only focus on one aspect of developing of young people. I think I would stop here and continue discussing later on after others have chance to talk.
Thank you very much, Katarina, for a very clear discussant position. I don't think our other discussant has connected yet. No, I see Andreas. So then we happily go to our two panelists, and I would first like to give the floor to Dominique Kirchdorfer. You are there.
Hello, I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear. So, so please, the floor is yours.
All right, I'll try to keep it short. So first of all, thank you, Katarina. I absolutely believe education to be the silver bullet when it comes to a lot of problems, whether it's early child development or even shifts in the labor market that we're experiencing now, which is also affecting older generations, though we're not talking about that today. I'd like to also talk a bit about what Shireen was mentioning. First of all, I didn't know these statistics. These numbers were quite shocking to me. which is revealing about how little we know in Europe about India. And what I find interesting is I did some reading in preparing for this presentation, and I found out that there was a study recently published by the India Institute of Mass Communications. I think it was published as early as January or February of this year, where they showed that Western media in particular portrayed India with inherent biases, and that reporting on India was inherently flawed and didn't portray how the country actually works, and that most Western media companies also lack the resources and staff to actually report on it accurately. And I think that also contributes to our unawareness of issues like these. And additionally, I think apart from education, one other big influence on social change, which apparently is happening very slowly in India, according to the statistics shown in the presentation, is soft power. So Western Europe in particular, but even Eastern Europe as well, has dramatically changed socially over the last few decades. And a lot of it has to do with the power of American soft power. So whether it's Hollywood or CNN and other kinds of Western media that also portray not just stories, but also values onto our societies. And there, for example, in India, Bollywood still is holding on as the top kind of production environment, whereas Hollywood is slowly gaining on them, but still not as popular. And this could have an influence on how slowly the social change happens. And of course, even if Hollywood, which it has its own inherent biases, were to try and succeed in establishing a foothold there, because we ourselves in the West who are making media increasingly with a global agenda, because we understand so little about Indian society, we will also not be able to even touch upon the subjects that really matter and that might need changing. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Dominique. And before we go on, I would like to invite the audience to please use the Q&A. I should maybe have said that at the beginning of the session. It was said at the opening words an hour or so ago, but please use the Q&A if you have any question, and we'll definitely keep an eye on that. And then I would like to pass the floor back to Shireen, and I would like first to echo what Dominique said. It was great to have the perspective from India, which is kind of missing sometimes in the debates, also here in our European part of the world. So it was very good to have that. Shireen, would you like to come back to some of the comments that we heard from Katarina and Dominique?
Yes, thank you so much, Nico. So I was taking notes. Thank you for your comments and insights. Yeah, Katarina, you started by saying education, yes, but not only formal. Need to think about non-formal education too. And you may remember that in my last slide, I did talk about building life skills and rights education. And those are generally created by groups, by young people's groups that are led by young people. So in a way, they are sort of youth leadership programs. Of course, how well do they work? Well, we don't know, but definitely that is an idea. You also said we need to work with boys, and this is very true. I actually quoted the key strategies from this systematic review, but in the scoping review that we had done on India, that was clearly one of the key strategies for change. So I'm sorry, in the interest of time, I left out that the additional strategies. Yeah, I think both of you talked about education. I think what's important is that there are many strategies through which education can be promoted. And basically, we're talking secondary education as a minimum. What these studies are showing is that conditional and unconditional grants, conditional cash and unconditional cash or kind grants for keeping kids in school is one of the most effective ways of keeping girls and boys in school and thereby delaying their marriage. There are other ways, for example, providing supplementary coaching to young people in India, which also gives an incentive for keeping girls and boys in school, especially for first generation learners who don't have that supportive schooling environment. So that is, so yes, Dominic, you said education as the silver bullet. I think we all agree, but what are the best mechanisms through which to reach it? Yes, the numbers are shocking. I'm not aware of this study you're quoting, but just to say, you're talking about Western influences and so on. Our media, I don't know how or whether you keep up with our media, but our media, I think there are two strands. There is the strand that, you know, keeps idolizing the traditional, long-suffering, self-sacrificing woman. And then there are the more realistic, more modern ones that are talking about women making their own choices. I think the problem in India is that with this very strong patriarchal culture, you may change through all our programs, through the media and so on. We may change attitudes of girls. We may even give them voice. But once they're confronting the patriarch, and if we haven't simultaneously worked on the patriarch and that generation, you know, we're into a logjam, and well, sometimes there's a positive result and sometimes there isn't. So just to say, and also the media now are providing very realistic presentations of women's situation. So there's a program called I'm a Woman, I Can Do Anything. But you know, I think a lot of Indians still prefer that stories of the long-suffering woman. So we have to change all that. So thank you very much. That great questions, and I will try to modify and include those in the next time I present. So thank you.
Thank you, Shireen. If I can, there are no questions in the Q&A yet, so please, people in the audience, feel free to pose your question. About the numbers, I'd like to follow up also what Dominique said. So in one of your first slides, you showed a kind of a gradual decline, then a bit faster decline, and then a stabilization of the child marriage rate. What are your expectations for the future? Did we hit a kind of a, will it stay stable, or is there possibility to lower it even further?
It was 27% marrying below age 18 in 2015-16. It's now gone down to 23 point something as of 2020. There's only been one period between 2005-06 and 2015 when we saw quite a substantial change. And that's very encouraging, and let's hope in 5 more years we see more change. But as I'm saying, the drivers are so compelling for child marriage that it is very worrying, and I wonder whether we've reached a lower ceiling. If you look by state of India, there are still some states, 3 or 4 maybe, where child marriage is over 30%. So the variation is still quite significant.
If I may follow up on that, maybe Katarina and Dominique can respond to that. So you also mentioned, Shireen, that in a quick search that also child marriage in some European countries, Central and Eastern Europe, but further a bit way to the east, is still prevalent. Katarina, could you maybe comment on that? What are your experiences with that? Because it's definitely the case. Can you comment?
I think that it's very, we don't talk about it in Bosnia and Herzegovina. I think it's quite taboo. I don't know the numbers, to be very honest. It's not something that, but there are, of course, there are cases. And when it comes to a cultural background, I think it's still a shame for minor marriages to happen. But of course, they are happening in some specific groups of our society as well. And I agree with your presentation saying that poverty is showing, it's one of the reasons that this is happening. And poverty is also a challenge to actually go to school and to be part of the society properly, especially for girls. I was mentioning youth work when I was voicing out first time. I think that that we always forget that regardless what kind of young people and issues we are talking about, that we need to approach them the way they see it. You know, like as a teacher in a kindergarten, we need to get on our knees and look the children in their eyes. And this is something that we also need to think of any crisis around young people in India or in Europe or in specific countries. And I agree with you that media plays a quite big role. And also in young people's life today, there is a peer pressure in social media as well that is setting up the scene for a young person to react or not react or to go with the flow with what's going on around them. So there are numbers of issues that formal education could help out, but if we don't work together and closely with other actors around young people, I'm not pessimistic, but I don't think that as you said, Shireen, that maybe we are still not at the lowest numbers in India or in any country, and not concerning only this issue as a crisis. Young people today in the world are more than ever aware of their peers around the world. Very aware how other people live. And they're also, because of this, very aware of the obstacles and the challenges and the boxes of their own country, societies where they live. And this brings numbers of crises in a personal life of a young person, but also in societies we live in. And I'm not sure that the adults around, including teachers and youth workers and everyone, are skillful enough to answer all the challenges at once when it happens to a young person. Girls, as you mentioned in your presentation, being very, rather more sensitive in this manner, but I think it's also something to be very discussed with young men. Working with young men, it's extremely, extremely important because the societies will never change if we don't work with everyone involved.
If I may follow up on that. So Shireen mentioned the 3 Ps. So the usual suspects are, of course, poverty, and patriarchy is also a usual suspect, I think. The third usual, it's a rather unusual suspect, maybe the pandemic. Can you both maybe comment a bit on that, Katarina, also from your perspective? Shireen mentioned a couple of examples in her presentation. Maybe she could elaborate a bit on that. But what did the pandemic do, especially in this particular case of young women that are in a very dire situation.
Well, I can go first. I don't see Dominic at this point.
No, Dominic left for a moment, I think. So,
yeah, I think that when it comes from the perspective of youth worker and somebody who's, I'm actually right now, I'm in a training with a group of young women and men politicians in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And they are actually discussing the pink taxes yesterday and many other important aspects for them as being a young politician. But pandemic actually opened so many unspoken discussions among young people in the society in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and if you allow me, I can say even here regionally in the Western Balkans. One of those is mental health. It still is, it's been a taboo, but at least we are talking about it. And the Institute for Youth Development, KULT, was actually doing a research on attitudes of young people on 7 different topics in 2021. And when it comes to health and pandemics, this is the first time after many years that in Bosnia and Herzegovina, young people are saying that the priority of the governments should be health. And health systems. And this is, I mean, the way the young people are talking about the health and importance of health, it's very important. One aspect is the mental health of young people. The second aspect is the fact that the number of young women, and I'm just searching for the statistics not to make it wrong, almost 40% of young women who were questioned with our questionnaire never went to health checkup at the gynecologist. And this is extremely, for a small country such we are, being in a Central Europe geographically, I think it shows so much about how we still perceive prejudice and what kind of society we are. Also, the number of young people showed that that the pandemic brought them into position to rethink their mental health and to ask for help from the professionals, which is also very perceived as a taboo. So if you go to a psychologist in our society, you are by your peers, but also by your parents and your teachers, you are very, you're targeted and labeled as somebody that it's not trying to get healthy, but are rather lunatic or whatever the society gives you the label of. So I think that the pandemic really opened many Pandora doors for young people to explore, but also in the society to think. And the public discourse is also a bit different now. Coming from the youth work perspective, I think it's in the same time very challenging and empowering because we finally are able to publicly speak on certain topics that was very pushy from non-formal education to be discussed. Now we can open these kind of discussions with schools and parents as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Dominic, glad that you're back. So we're discussing the impact of the pandemic and crisis resilience, and you from the future European youth future perspective, can you join that discussion? Can you add maybe something?
Yeah, so I'm afraid I fell out in the middle of the topic change, so I didn't catch all of what was just discussed. Yes.
So we were discussing the 3 Ps: the poverty, the patriarchy, and the pandemic, and then their impact on the situation of younger people, and well, in this case, early marriage in particular. But now we're discussing more the pandemic driver.
Yes. I've discussed this at the last panel yesterday already, but I think the pandemic and crises like it in particular have especially a particularly strong negative effect on the socially and financially disadvantaged. So while people who have financial backing, who have the social backing from the environment, are able to leverage maybe even crisis situations to their advantage and rise up to the challenges, beat the challenges, and therefore advance, people from disadvantaged backgrounds are usually left behind. And it's a systemic issue because usually policies don't really address a particular social group. They are usually one-size-fits-all solutions.
Okay. Shireen, would you like to come back on that?
Yeah, I think this is a very interesting conversation. It's really breaking down the other consequences of the pandemic. And, you know, as you were talking, I was thinking of social media access and even access to devices. In India, when we went to online education, what happened? There's a household with just one device. Who gets the device? It's the boy and not the girl. And as a result, the girl lags. She's put to do housework. She's more unlikely to return to school when school reopens. And it's a spiraling effect. And seeing her at home, the only alternative that's seen is a child marriage. So getting devices into the hands of girls is a really empowering mechanism. Not only does it give her access to education, but it also gives her access to new ideas and all those, and of course, peer contacts that she wouldn't have otherwise. And by the way, giving girls a mobile phone is often seen as something to be feared because parents think that girls with mobile phones then make their own choices with boys, and many have withdrawn mobile phone facilities from their daughters, not their sons. Yes, has the pandemic raised consciousness about more taboo topics like mental health and violence and so on? Yes, for sure. In India, we're really very concerned about the mental health effects of the pandemic, of the lockdowns on young people. Suicide, suicidal thoughts, they're all very prominent, just as they are in the West. And seeking care, seeking information, seeking counseling has all been blocked for young people, particularly the unmarried. And so that too is a major concern. Sorry, thank you.
Thank you very much. So we're talking indeed about resources and education, and that could be a silver bullet. There was one other thing that you mentioned, if I may, and that would be my last comment. One policy domain is the transition from school to work. That could be very important, and that's also what you were discussing, Katarina. So it's not just keeping them in school, but also transitioning into a job, which comes then with the possibility to have additional resources, which then is good for crisis resilience and other things. Is that something that we also see? Can you comment a bit on that further, Shireen?
Yeah, as you may know, in India, we have about the lowest labor force participation rate in the world. There's a term called NEET, not in education, employment, or training. And there too, India, I think it's like 45, I may be wrong, but 45% of girls in a particular age group are considered to be NEET. So getting girls to make that transition is an extremely difficult and uphill task. There are huge normative factors that inhibit parents from allowing their daughter to do any job that would require mixing with males, public transport, anything that might, smirch her character and thereby the family honor. So as a result, girls have very few career options. They can be teachers because there's always a need for teachers in your marital home. They can learn tailoring because there's always a need for tailoring in the village wherever you go. So it's at the moment very limited. What these couple of interventions have done is something very radical. They've supported girls to get training in back office jobs, in call center jobs. And at least this one study has shown that when girls are trained and supported in these activities, not only did their own resources and their self-confidence and their ability to make a choice for marriage, not only did all those things change, but also in their village, marriage rates went down, college education went up, more girls were in college, and in general, that is seen as a model whereby a supported school to work transition could be possible. And now that is being tried at not national level, but at sub-national level in some states. So that was one possibility.
Thank you. And then again, another similarity between India and Europe, because also need is a very important priority in for instance, in the European Commission. It's one of their policies. And maybe a final word before we are closing the session. Dominic, can I give you the floor for some last comments that you would like to make, and then
yes,
Katarina? Okay.
In fact, if you may allow, instead of making a final statement, I'd rather have final questions.
Also good.
That's all right. So I have two questions for Shireen. Number one, China has somewhat successfully implemented policies to change the behavior of parents towards their daughters, specifically by incentivizing them financially to educate their daughters, send them to university, and prepare them to have the ability to make their own decisions later in life and support the family financially as well with their wealthy jobs. Has there been any kind of attempt like this in India? And if not, why not? Are there no bottom-up movements or anything like that that are trying to implement this change? And number two, is there a rift between the urban and rural environments and communities in India? Because I am aware of, and I do have friends as well who are Indian female managers in top firms who are very successful and quite independent, I would say.
Okay, so well, I give Shireen a little bit time to think about these very important questions. Maybe Katarina, you have some final words to add to the discussion, or even more questions?
Yeah, there are many questions in my head right now, and I'm trying to compare if it's even possible to compare what Shireen was talking about, like India and Europe, and especially the Western Balkans where I work. I think it's for Bosnia and Herzegovina, I would say that it's not only the crisis that we have. It's so many other crises that are happening around young people, including the last situation with Russia and Ukraine, and the influence of this, and the fact that we are living in a post-war society, with having in mind that the number of young people who are living in this area are born just after the war, that they are in their 20s and 30s right now. And another part of the crisis is also the fact that we have a huge brain drain. So the possibilities that young women have here are very limited, but they're trying to find the ways outside of the country, which then opens a totally another questions. And talking about NEET, our governments are still getting to know with the term. So we are not even talking about we're not talking about it properly yet. So, you know, like the NEET youth is something that youth workers and trainers and events such this are introducing to our officials coming from the municipal level up to the state level. So in order to systematically approach to all these issues, as I said, we need to have a comprehensive and systematic overview of everything, but go back to basics, I would say, and talk to young people first.
Okay, and talk to each other across nations and in multidisciplinary settings like we have today. Shireen, could you come back to the questions and a final word?
So, Dominic, you said China has successfully changed parental behavior by incentivizing parents to educate their daughters. The point I was making about conditional and unconditional cash transfers, that is really a similar type of program. And that exists at state level in many of our states. So parents are being incentivized for keeping both their boys and girls in school. If they attend over 80% of the class of the year, parents get the incentive. So that does exist, but norms are so strong that even our politicians are not going there. In fact, I think several of our politicians are also marrying their daughters as children. So there isn't that kind of a commitment. And particularly when we talk about forced sex, I think every politician or traditional men will consider that it is their duty and their right to arrange the marriage of their daughter, whether the girl wants to or not. And so those kinds of norms are really very difficult to chip away at unless we do something very dedicatedly with parents. So I don't think that we have any intention of meeting SDG target 5.3 on child and forced marriage. So there perhaps, and I know perhaps I'm begging the question because China too was a very traditional society. But as you know, there are many other differences between China and India. India is a chaotic society, but norms are very strongly held. Is there a rift between is there a difference between urban and rural? For sure. I mean, what I'm talking about is the average. Many women in urban India and even some in rural India hold positions of responsibility. I'm not denying that. But on average, the situation still remains very much of a concern. And Katarina, you said governments are not talking about or familiar with NEET. I quite agree. I don't think our government is at all familiar with it. Thanks.
Okay, thank you all. I think we are coming to the end of this session, and I think it was a very rich session and based on a very good keynote presentation and excellent discussants and a very good discussion. I would like to thank especially Shireen for her presentation, Dominique for a great role as a discussant, and Katarina, great job. Thank you very much. And as I said before, this topic and this discussion once more proved to me that we need to have much more of these multidisciplinary international discussions. And we should thank our good friend Andreas Edel, Population Europe, and the other organizers and sponsors for giving us this opportunity. Thank you very much. We're closing this session. Don't go away because in about 15 minutes or so, we will start with the next session. But thank you. This session is closed, and back to you, Andreas.
Yeah, thanks so much for this very insightful session, and also for your encouragement to continue that exercise. I really think it's extremely important for us to address these issues on a global scale, to understand the differentialities, but also the commonalities. And I think we learned a lot from this panel, so thanks a lot. The next one will start at, we have now a break, and the next one will then start at 2:45, 15:45, 2:45, then on the youth and the life course. And we look very much forward to having you then with us again. So take a break and then see you in roughly 15 to 20 minutes. Bye-bye.